I don't think that anybody's opinions should sway another person's reading habits. I don't think that you should or shouldn't read what you want to read based on what my opinions are. I think everybody should read exactly what they want to. That being said, I have some very well developed opinions about which authors I want to spend my time and money on and which artists in general I want to spend my time and money on. I think that when we actually invest ourselves in art, we're not only investing ourselves in the art itself, but we're investing ourselves in the artist.
Hello, folks, and welcome to Author Adjacent, a show about the journey from hobbyist writer to professional author. I'm your host, Michael Vadney. I'm sitting here with returning guest James Lloyd Dulin, author of the Malitu series and a contributing author to the Ethos anthology of people who have been affected by those.
Thank you for having me again.
And that's something I think a lot of people will sometimes see. You were talking a little bit about this earlier, where they will see this on the page and be like, "Oh, the author condones this," and just it's very reductive.
It happens all
thinking.
the time. I am not.
And
I'm not precious with
you
made up
see
words.
it in action, like Brent Week's Night Angel series. Are you familiar with it?
I try not to make them too difficult when I'm writing my books, but everything English is weird. Everything has a different sound depending on how you want to pronounce it, and it comes out differently on different voices. Whatever. You know, as long as you spend money on my books, I don't care how you pronounce them.
You know, that's a good point. I think I shall also adopt a similar attitude. The last time we had you onto the show last week, we were talking about your author journey, the poetry that you wrote before getting into your series, and kind of just shoot the shit for a little bit. But
Yep.
this time, we actually have a subject in mind that we want to talk about today, and it is the classic art versus artist debate. And for those of you on the screen or on the other side of the screen that don't know, that this is the debate that centers around when you evaluate art, do you keep the artist in mind? Like, do their actions, does their existence affect the appreciation of the art, and should it affect the appreciation of the art? And I'm gonna dive right into this one with the first question that I have for you, James.
All right.
Do you believe authors' personal politics or actions should influence how readers interpret or value their work, especially when the two seem to conflict?
So I'm gonna sidestep the question for a second, and I'll come right back.
How dare
I
you?
want to start with the. I don't think that anybody's opinions should sway another person's reading habits. I don't think that you should or shouldn't read what you want to read based on what my opinions are. I think everybody should read exactly what they want to. That being said, I have some very well developed opinions about which authors I want to spend my time and money on and which artists in general I want to spend my time and money on. And I think that when we actually invest ourselves in art, we're not only investing ourselves in the art itself, but we're investing ourselves in the artist, both financially, but also part of the art is the artist. It's the artist showing up on page. Um, our thoughts, our feelings, our philosophies on the world, they show up on page whether we want them to or not. I mean, Tolkien can say all he wants that Lord of the Rings has nothing to do with World War II. I don't believe it. um, it's going to be very hard to live through that time and for that not to affect what appears on the page. Um, and so for me, I think it's a calculus of looking at multiple factors. One, is the artist still alive and making money off of said project? Two, with that money, are they continuing to do damage? With the fame and attention, are they continuing to do damage? Three, is whatever issue with the artist in conflict to the art? So if, for instance, if you're writing about issues of poverty or critiquing poverty, but you have $1 billion in your bank account, I don't necessarily think you're the best person to write about poverty. I think your perspective is skewed, and you probably don't really understand the subject matter you're talking about. If you are writing about genocide and having issue with genocide, and then you contribute to a country committing genocide, um, then I think that your views on genocide are then forfeit. Like, I'm not going to spend my time and effort on somebody and their opinions or their stories that are anti-establishment or anti-genocide or anti-nationalism or anti-colonialism when they participate in those things. Um, it There are better sources for me. So I think it comes from, I want an authentic story experience. I want an authentic art experience, and I do think that art comes from artists, and so who the artist is going to affect the work.
You can't help but put a piece of you onto your page or a piece of you into your art, like you were saying with Tolkien in World War II. Like he is famous for over and over saying that, and then he wrote a huge story where there's a massive war where two sides, and it's hard to see not to see those influences. But
Yes.
what would you respond then to readers who feel like uneasy about enjoying a book if they learn the author supports views that oppose their own in real life?
Read what you want to read. Like, that's part of artistic freedom, is also the freedom to consume what kind of art you want to consume. At the same time, I think the question every person needs to ask for themselves is, to what level to what level of importance do you weigh your enjoyment of a thing versus the harm someone is causing? So the obvious example here is J.K. Rowling. She has outwardly said the profits that come from the HBO show are going to go towards funding her anti-trans organization. That she has already funded anti-trans legislation that has gone through. She has used her platform to harm people. And so, to what extent is your enjoyment of a thing, to what level of importance do you place on that versus knowingly contributing your time to somebody who's going to use those dollars to harm a group of marginalized people? And so it's your own calculus. And the reason why I think so many people are uncomfortable with this conversation is, um, when they answer that question honestly, they our enjoyment is not as important as a person. Um, but we still want to enjoy the thing. It feels good. I have very nostalgic thoughts about Harry Potter. I grew up reading those books. I also don't think my nostalgia is more important than what is actually happening in the world. And there are other books. There are better books to read. There are better TV shows that could be made and are made. So I'm gonna watch those. I'm gonna spend my time with those. So it's a personal decision, and people feel judged when they hear that, and their choice is to watch the show or play the game or read the book, and they they feel judged. And this is not about judging other people, but it's about making choices in your own lives. And I think that should all try to be morally consistent with the choices we make. And so I have a set of morals. You all have a set of morals. And when I make the decisions I make in my life, I try to stay morally consistent. We hear a lot of people talking about, whether something makes sense in a fantasy book, and it's all about internal logical consistency. And I try to maintain that logical consistency in my life.
So it's mostly just about like practicing what you preach.
Yeah.
Like saying I believe in this thing and following through with that. And there are a lot of aspects in life where that becomes very difficult. Like looking at the meat industry and stuff like that. Like
Yeah.
I enjoy a steak, I enjoy a hamburger, I do eat meat. But then it's also the you look at the meat industry and how that happens and how that hamburger comes to you, this hunk of cow and everything.
Yeah.
And then you have the choice to make of, do you keep eating the meat or do you try to do something about it or do you change your ways? I have a friend who he does not eat beef. He eats chicken and fish only.
Uh-huh.
And his big reason for doing that is because he doesn't like the environmental effects of
Yeah.
like the
The
meat
cattle
industry,
industry.
especially like beef and cattle and stuff like
Yeah.
that. That's his reason for doing it.
So
And that's a decision that he made
yeah.
to continue his morals. Sorry,
And,
go
and
ahead.
I completely agree with that philosophy. It also comes into line with, have you seen The Good Place?
I think I have, yes. Yeah, I haven't seen
Um,
all of it, but I've seen a lot
okay.
of it.
So one of the big conceits of the show is this idea that the world has gotten so interconnected that all of our decisions could have this long reaching harmful effect, that we couldn't spend all day wondering, okay, if I'm going to buy this thing, it's going to harm this person in the other half of the world in this way because it wasn't farmed sustainably, it wasn't done to, like, there, every choice is an infinite number of choices behind it. And so the idea of being able to live a virtuous life is impossible, because no matter the number, no matter what choice you make, you're harming something because of the way that we've set up our systems in society. So you have a cell phone, you're contributing to slave labor in the mines, you're contributing to slave-like labor in terms of the cell phones being put together in factories that have suicide nets. You're you're contributing to X number of factors. And so you get into statements like, there's no ethical consumption under capitalism. This idea that because so many things are interconnected to the exploitation of workers and people, that uh, any consumption is actually exploiting workers. So you get down a path where, one, no action can be moral, or two, you get, I have to watch out for any action because everything's a moral dilemma. And both of those create inaction. So I think that we all choose our causes. We all choose where to focus our energy, and we all make our decisions. I think some decisions affect our lives more greatly than others. So for me, the moral calculus of watching or not watching a show on HBO, or not reading another Neil Gaiman book, is pretty simple, because my inaction of not doing those things, that's a pretty easy moral decision. My your friend's action of deciding never to consume beef again is much more of an action in a lot of people's lifestyle. So I think we all kind of weigh these things, and at the end of the day, we all make our own decisions, and that they're going to be what they're going to be. Um, my decisions are not a moral condemnation of anybody else. My decisions are a an effort to upkeep my own morals in the way that I see fit.
How would you say you then wow, we're getting like really far off from like books and art and it's getting to like the philosophy of human beings and society as a whole.
Yeah,
Uh, but let's keep digging into it.
yeah,
Uh, my next question actually is then like where do you draw that line? Like bringing it back to art versus artist,
yeah.
where do you draw the line of I know this thing about the artist and it doesn't make me feel good, but I like their art.
Hmm.
How do you decide who ends up on which side of that line? Of like I'm no longer going to support theirs, or I am going. You talked about it a little bit earlier, where part of that calculus for you is the artist still alive?
Is the artist still alive is a big thing. Are they still making money from it is a big thing. Are they still doing damage is a big thing. Like, I think it was Matthew Broderick when in Ireland was involved in a vehicular manslaughter and killed someone. Um, I think it was ruled that he was not found guilty or something like that. But this is somebody who killed someone, and maybe due to negligence, maybe not. And you could say, well, now I'm never going to watch anything with Matthew Broderick again. Is he likely to use the funds that I spend on a Matthew Broderick project to go and run somebody over? Probably not. Is Neil Gaiman going to use continued adulation um, and fame from the consumption of his of shows based on his books, from consumption of his books, to continue to abuse women from a position of power? I think that's a lot more likely. So I'm probably not going to do that one. If somebody steals, what were they stealing? How did they harm a community? So I think for me, it's much more about who's being harmed. Could they continue to be harmed? And what will the effect of my action have on that? So the fact that J.K. Rowling has $1 billion and has picked a very specific group of people to go after for some reason, um, like, not that she didn't have a lot of other stuff in her books that was problematic, but she has picked the trans community as the community she wants to go after by forming an organization. Like, that's pretty far out there. Um, and she has the resources and wealth to do it, and she's getting more resources and wealth, fame, attention, and platform um, by the continued consumption of her materials and the continued consumption of her IP. So that, I think, is on the line for me. If you have somebody who's an alcoholic or cheated or did something wrong in their personal life, I'm probably not going to make that the biggest issue in my life in terms of whether or not I consume their material. But someone like Chris Brown, who pretty much every 3 or 4 years is arrested for beating up another romantic partner, or uh, somebody else in the music industry, that's probably a red flag for me that's probably going to continue to happen. And his continued fame is only allowing that as a platform, encouraging that and enabling that. Not that my not listening to Chris Brown is going to stop him, but I also just don't want to be a part of it.
And do you feel like you are a part of it when you consume the art of the artists that you disagree with?
Yeah, if I'm paying for it, if I'm contributing to their fame, on if I go on TikTok and I'm promoting a book by somebody I know does awful things, yeah, I think I'm contributing to their access and their platform. And I think there's a difference between personal and public consumption as well. So if somebody has a set of Harry Potter books at home and reads them in the comfort of their own home and never says anything about it on, social media, is that hurting anyone? No. If a person is reviewing that set as they reread and doing like read-alongs with a community of people and trying to encourage other people to get into it and sharing it with the next generation and doing all that to hype up Harry Potter, that has a different effect. That's a public consumption versus a private consumption kind of thing. Me listening to Chris Brown with a CD that I bought 15 years ago is not going to do anything to him. But if I'm, hosting an event and I play all Chris Brown music, that's a different kind of consumption.
Have you ever heard of the concept of death of the artist when
Yep.
reviewing like books or different various art and stuff like that?
Yeah.
Yeah. for those of you on the other side of the screen, pretty much this is just the idea that you act as if the artist is dead. They're no longer living. It doesn't matter who they are. It's just the art. And that's kind of the opposing side
Mhm.
to a lot of what you're discussing in the art versus artist debate is uh, one side is like, yes, you just pretend that they don't exist and you talk about the art, and the other is what they do matters and it does affect their art because when we create art, like we were saying earlier, you put a piece of yourself into it and it supports a lifestyle that you do something with, that people have a right to either agree or disagree with. It is hard to say this side is 100% right and this side is 100% right in this debate. And I think that's what draws a lot of people to this discussion
Yeah.
because it is something where both sides have some really good points.
I think there are two different things you're talking about. There's the death of the artist, and then there's this idea of who's right. And um, I think the second one is probably easier to tackle. I don't think anybody's right. I think that, like I said it before, I think that your consumption of art is a personal decision that you get to make. I think that a lot of people who are on the side of only the art matters get offended and feel judged when people take into account the misdeeds of an author or other artist and decide to boycott their work for this reason or that reason. Um, and that is a personalization thing. Like, I'm not going, Michael, I think you're a bad person because you consumed Harry Potter. That is not the statement I'm making. I am making a statement that I think the consumption of Harry Potter and its IP leads to J.K. Rowling's continued platforming and continued enrichment, which she is using to harm a group of people. That has nothing to do with you, Michael, the person. It has to do with my views on J.K. Rowling and my personal decision to consume her material or not. And there are definitely people who advocate for things like boycotts, and I understand those, especially from a position of when you're talking about authors continuing to do direct harm to a community. As far as death as author goes, of the author goes, um, I think death of the author doesn't actually exist. Um, if it did, our our classes on literature would be very boring. Like, there's a reason why we talk about the artist. There's a reason why we talk about Van Gogh and what he was going through and why he cut off his ear. Like, there's a reason why we talk about, well, Pablo Picasso and his predilection for children and how that affects how we consume his art. Like, we talk about art in its context. We talk about art in its context of when it was made, who it was made by, and how that informs the work all the time. So the idea of death of an author is, let's try to consume the themes and the ideas of this book within this vacuum. But none of the themes or ideas exist within a vacuum. They all exist within the context they were created in. And part of that context is the person who created them. It is the context of the time period, it's the context of the person who created them, it's the context of what other art was happening at the time. Like, art is in constant communication with each other, and one work reflects on another, and that communication is important. um yeah, we can just read a book and just enjoy it and be done with the story, but if we're actually going to invest ourselves in literature and look at it, pull apart, get to understand it. That's what we do with literature. That's what we do with classics. If we never tried to understand who Charles Dickens was, or uh, or Emily Dickinson, and we just said, "Well, these books were created. Here you go," we would lose a lot of the context. We'd lose a lot of understanding from what's happening on the page. So the whole field of literature and literature review is deciding not to separate the art from the artist.
Sorry, I need a moment to consume that. Because that is a very prevalent strategy, especially for like people on like BookTube and stuff like that, and people who do review books. Will actively call out like, "Hey, I review books as like death of the author. I don't care who they are, what they are, like Neil Gaiman or whoever. Like, I'm just I'm reading the book and I'm judging it as an art piece." And it can be very confusing for a lot of people because in these books we often have good people doing good things, fighting for moral causes, and then the artist or the author does something that is considered reprehensible.
Yeah.
And that conflict comes within ourselves, and we're just like, I don't feel good about this. I love this. This is great. It's teaching me these great lessons. But the guy who made it, not so much.
2 points to that. One is a simple point of not everything an author writes is something they believe. We like it's important to acknowledge that. I think some people are very reductive in that space of saying, "Oh, this person wrote this character who did this very ugly thing. They must be okay with it." That is not true. I do think that authors often show their biases on the page when they how they address certain violence and things like that on the page, and how they actually address that within the characterization, the dialogue, and the context that follows. I think that's all true and that can be evaluated. But just because it's on the page doesn't mean it is a direct belief of the author. Um, Two, I think that we all, every single person is a microcosm of this concept we're talking about, which is the contradictions between the moral self and who we actually are in real life. I have not always upheld every single moral that I espouse. I have made mistakes, I've grown, I've learned. We need to allow room for that kind of humanity to exist, 100%. Um, but we also can't ignore it. Um, I don't think that any one of us is better for ignoring the times where we have slipped up and not done the right thing. We're better for actually confronting it. And so to actually understand the themes that are being written on the page, sometimes we have to confront the contradictions. Um, so I think context always matters. Um, it's I hate to keep on going back to the Harry Potter reference, but it's just such a prevalent conversation. If you go back to that children's book, because it's a children's series, and you actually read the themes in there, Hermione is like blasted for this idea that she thinks slavery is a bad thing. Every ethnic character is named with a racial stereotype. What's the Kingsley Shacklebolt is one of the only black characters in the book. Cho Chang is an ethnic name that does not exist because it's pulling from two different ethnicities. I mean, maybe there is a Chinese Korean person who has the name Cho Chang, but that is, I don't think that's what J.K. Rowling was going through. I think she just goes, what sounds ethnically Asian? So there's a lot of racial issues in there. The goblins and a lot of people draw the connection that I think is especially very prevalent in the movies of it being a characterization of Judaism and Jewish people and their hoarding of gold and their like all these Jewish stereotypes put on. There's actually a Star of David on the floor of the Bank of Granates in the movies. So, and you can what people will say about that is it was filmed in a bank where there was a Star of David. But that's also a choice. You have looking at characters and caricatures of Jewish people throughout history. They're depicted with long hooked noses, They're depicted in very specific ways with very specific stereotypes. And she put those all together with the Star of David on the floor of the bank. Those are very specific choices. And J.K. Rowling didn't make all those choices in terms of the filming, but they're all on the page as well. So if you go back and you look at the context of the book we're talking about and defending, there are also a lot of other issues there. And so you can dismiss all of those, or you can actually critically engage with them. And that's where you get into the realm of it's not that deep, but I think it is that deep because those are the themes she taught children. And they're in contradiction to a lot of the themes in her book, uh, which is about freedom and representation um, for people from different walks of life, and for anti anti-fascism in terms of your Voldemort character and things like that. So those things exist, but they exist in contrast to people defending slavery within the context of the book. And the one person who has an issue with it gets lambasted. So you have contradicting themes within a book, and then on top of that you have everything going on with the author. And there's things I think a lot of people aren't actually dealing with within that IP. And that happens within a lot of books. We see people's reflections of their actions on the page. And when we don't deal with the people that are making the art, we miss those connections. We miss the contradictions. We miss what is actually there to pull apart.
Actually, if you don't mind, I'd like to bring this conversation a little closer to home
Yeah.
and talk a little bit about your series. Actually,
Okay.
uh, so how do you navigate the tension between like your own beliefs and the themes that you write about in your own stories? Like, you have villains, you have bad people in your
Mhm.
story. Have you ever written about ideas that you don't fully align with your own personal views?
I mean, a lot of what I'm doing in my books, and this is my personal writing, this is not what everybody does, but a lot of what I'm doing in my books is exploring ideas that I don't necessarily have uh, a firm decision on in my life, in my view of the world. So my novella is, the major theme of it is you have this woman who is a part of a non-violent clan who has committed herself to nonviolence, who's trying to end this war that has been going on for nearly 100 years. But in order to do that, she has to commit acts of violence. And so, to what extent can violence bring about nonviolence? Can what extent violence be used as a tool to end violence? Is that a possibility, or what does that actually do to a person, to a culture, when violence is used in that way? So those are questions I don't necessarily have the answer to. I think I go back and forth on the utility of violence when battling oppressive ideologies, when battling violence in our current context. So what does that look like? Um, in my main series, uh, there are uh, it's all told from the perspective of the colonized. There's not a POV chapter from a colonizer or somebody from the Gauch, which is the colonizing empire. And that's done very specific, done very intentionally, because this is not a book about justifying both sides. It's a book that in many ways is critiquing colonialism. And I don't think we need to understand that not all the colonists had not all the soldiers were there to colonize, or like they didn't have that personal ambition. They were there because they had to be. Like, we explore that a little bit in some dialogue that happens, but when it's from the perspective of those being colonized, I don't think most people who are in that situation of their homeland being colonized care about the motives of the people that are burning their towns. They're not like, well, what was his childhood like? Maybe there's a reason why he's doing this. And so that was a very intentional thing of this is not a POV book where it's exploring that side. There is that side to be explored, and that has been explored in hundreds of books. The colonizer side of things has been explored in a lot of stories. So that was not the point of view this was taking. But there are people reacting to colonization in very different ways. So Kalo is his main journey is trying to come to terms with he started a rebellion that has gotten people killed, hundreds, thousands of people killed, and he believes that is his fault, and he regrets it. You know, the fight for liberation of his people ended up getting a lot of his people killed. It freed others, but it killed others. And he doesn't know in his later years how to deal with the weight of that. Now, do I believe that people should sit idly by when they are being oppressed and colonized and killed and enslaved and things like that? No. But Kalo justifiably has some really hard it has a really hard time understanding and contextualizing, coming to terms with the idea that his actions got a lot of his people killed. And it wasn't his blade. He didn't do the killing. But maybe if he hadn't made those decisions, maybe they would still be alive. They might be in hard conditions, but they might still be alive. I don't necessarily agree with Kalo. And there are other people that are much hardliners on this that no matter how many people die, it's worth it as long as we kill the empire. I don't necessarily agree with that either. So like there's every character in a book comes from a point of view, and while you're writing from their point of view or their perspective, that is the point of view or perspective you adopt. But the larger themes are often um at least in my books, the larger themes are telling in terms of what my belief systems are. And I think that is often true with authors. So if you write a grimdark book or grimdark characters who do a lot of bad things, often what authors will do is that won't turn out well for those characters, or those characters will have to learn a lesson, or there'll be some thematic pushback on why that was in the story. And that in a way justifies that action being a part of the story because you're learning more about how those negative actions impact the world, and you're getting like larger macro understanding of what happens with that specific character from their point of view. And that's I think the difference between you might write a character doing a horrible thing like the Prince of Thorns. That doesn't mean Mark Lawrence believes in all of those things. But the themes also don't justify him doing those things. The story itself is not about this character is doing everything right, this is perfect, and this is how you should live. The themes are kind of antithetical to that. And so there there's a difference between character action and theming.
There are a lot of authors that use writing to safely explore the more difficult parts of like humanity and human psyche. I was just talking about this with E.L. Montague literally yesterday doing the interview for him. How there are a lot of people that do explore violence and conflict and various dark things of humanity through writing. And that doesn't mean that they condone them, but it is a safe way to explore it and understand it and be sympathetic of people who have been affected by those things.
Yeah.
Um, and that's something I think a lot of people will sometimes see. You were talking a little bit about this earlier, where they will see this on the page and be like, "Oh, the author condones this," and just
Yeah.
it's very reductive thinking. And you see it in action, like Brent Week's Night Angel series. Are you familiar with it?
I'm not as familiar with that, no.
Well, there's a lot of sexual assault in it, and it shapes several of the characters in very important ways.
Hmm.
And I was talking to someone online about this actually, and he actually joined the conversation. It shocked the hell out of me. Uh, and he just said, "Yeah, I wanted to explore how when this happens to young people, how this affects them becoming adults." Because like in his personal life, his wife is a social worker and she has to help these people,
Hmm.
and they as human beings were just trying to deal and explore this thing. So I do think you have to be careful looking
Yeah.
at an artist's art and not making too hasty of a judgment of,
Yeah.
oh, because they wrote this, because this exists in their life, they must be this way. But that is
Yeah.
also very different than you witness and see them doing something in real life and being like, that's not good.
It becomes very difficult to navigate this whole question when you bring into the question the themes of a book and what characters' choices are, because I mean, as you say, a lot of people are exploring different things in there. But then you also understand the context of who's exploring those themes. So there was a controversy like, less than a year ago that kind of blew up on, I think, TikTok, where this this dark romance writer wrote a series in which uh, basically the the heir of a Ku Klux Klan legacy ends up in a romance with the daughter of a cartel head honcho kind of thing. And so people are questioning, why is there this huge story trying to humanize like a staunch white supremacist? And why is this romantic? Why are we and so it's not that I don't think there can be a story that involves somebody from the Klan and tries to understand their thought process, but also what are we doing with that character? Is that character just there for shock value? Is that character there to explore the themes of racism and how that has harmed communities? Uh, does that has the author actually done research on the Klan? Because the other thing was that's not how the Klan works. The Klan doesn't have like it's not passed down hierarchical. Like it's not. Of course, there are generational people that come into the Klan, but it's not like a crown passed down. And so there were just misunderstandings of what the Klan was, of what the Klan does, and then it all tried to humanize this staunch white supremacist because of love. And so people were like taking huge issue with that. And so I think there's also a question of who's writing and how are they handling the themes. Because as a white person, if you're writing on racism, I'm a white person that's written on colonialism and racism and the issues of a white imperial force coming into uh, a, a continent that is full of people of color with different cultures and trying to take it over. If I'm just doing that because of aesthetics, that's not going to do really well. The themes aren't going to hit, they're not going to be understood. But my research on race and colonialism and my years of study in this area inform what I do and become part of that story. And I'm actually talking about the idea of what happens, what are the dangers of whiteness and colonialism, and this enforced race or this enforcement of a racial identity onto a group in terms of oppression, and what does that look like those are part of the themes. It's not a treatise on race where I like break down race in the text of the story, but like I'm handling these issues with care, and if somebody has an issue with how I handled them, then I'm willing to take full responsibility for that. I'm not going to step back from that. But I think some people use issues like that in their texts to sensationalize, to um, as an aesthetic backdrop, because they believe that stories about people of color are selling at a certain time. Um, like there's very inauthentic reasons to approach those dynamics, um, and they come across as inauthentic. But that also brings into play like who's the artist and what kind of art are they creating? Because if you're talking about sexual assault, a sexual assault survivor probably is going to be able to write a character who survives sexual assault better than somebody who hasn't. No matter what research you do, that is probably going to come across more authentically. If you're writing the story of an immigrant journey and you're not an immigrant, it's probably not going to come across as authentically as somebody who's experienced that. So we all need to use empathy and explore different identities, different positions in the world, and different ideas. And that's what writing is. But we also need to recognize what our vantage point is as an author, as a creator, as an artist. Um, and so I think that all goes into the conversation of I don't think you can kill off the author because the way that they approach certain themes are going to be different because of their identities, because of the way they existed in the world, because of their wealth, because of their poverty, because of this or that or the other.
That was a fantastic answer. James, we are getting near the end of our episode,
Of
but
my
could you
rambling.
please? No, you're doing great. Just try to keep these around 45 minutes,
Hmm.
just for like condensing and stuff like that. Like this has been a really good talk about what is frankly a very difficult subject. But I think we've handled it with care. We've talked about some really good stuff. I'm not gonna lie, I like this a lot. I was a little apprehensive going into this conversation because I am very conflict averse, uh, but I think we did a good job.
I tend not to be too conflict adverse. It gets me into trouble sometimes. I speak my mind. Um,
No worries. I'm trying to be better at it. So this was great practice for me. Thank you.
of course. No, thank you for having the conversation. I think it's an interesting conversation to have. I try not to be dogmatic about it in terms of prescribing my view to other people. Everybody's got to come to their own terms and how they want to approach the art they consume. I think that's an important thing. I think it steps into censorship when we say you can't read this, you can't read that. Um, I might suggest here are the reasons why I don't read that, and you might want to think about it. I'll go that far, but I'm not going to tell you what you can or can't read. I don't think that's appropriate to do. Um, but yeah, I think that there's a lot of hurt feelings in conversations like these sometimes, and so trying to be careful with that is difficult.
And on that note, James, tell the people, where can they find you? Where can they find your books?
So if my ranting hasn't turned you off completely, um,
Or inspired you?
or inspired you, yeah, depends on how you follow this conversation, I guess. You can find me on jamesldulin.com. You can join my newsletter. I send out a newsletter once a month so that you can keep up with me. You can find my books on Amazon, Barnes& Noble, bookshop.org, any of the places where you can buy books. My ebooks are exclusive to Amazon, but everything else is wide. So you find that anywhere. Um, yeah, find me on social media. You can yell at me about how you disagreed or agreed with whatever I said here, and we'll chat.
That sounds like an excellent plan. Prepare for your DMs to be flooded, for good or bad. I'm not sure what
I
we're going
guess.
here. But James, again, thank you so much for coming on to the show.
Thank you.
And folks, until next time, remember, let's be author adjacent again. Have a good. All right, we did it. We survived.